But she lived in India with Swami Ramakrishna for almost 2 years. She met Holy Mother, she met all kinds of the direct disciples. And she wrote a book about her experiences in India called Days in an Indian Monastery. It's really interesting. One of the few Western women that was able to stay healthy and do that. I don't know whether she stayed healthy, but she did it. Let's see. Hope everyone got their reading done. I'm counting that you did.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The lilies that you see up on above Ramakrishna's picture on the altar, a devotee couple in Santa Maria grew those and brought them down. Aren't they gorgeous? They're very good flower growers, and they bring them quite often to the temple. Hi, Leanne. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Is everything going well?
Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Good. So, how's your weather there?
We had sunshine this morning. And
so
then
glad.
it got sprayed over and cooled down. But it's great gardening weather.
Perfect.
Yep. So it's good.
All right. Things are good here too.
Yeah. So I was saying I think we're going to have just 2 more Wednesdays with this book. And then it is Memories of a Loving Soul. Swami Prabhavananda. It's about Swami Premananda by Swami Prabhavananda. As I say, they changed the name of it, so. Hello. You're welcome to come in. Okay. We're having a reading on one of the saints of the order. Yeah. And you are welcome to stay or leave. Okay. Yep. This one is How a Shepherd Boy Became a Saint, and we're on page 156, The Reminiscences of Sister Deva Mata. And I'm going to read the first, the introduction to her. Sister Deva Mata, born as Laura Glenn, met Swami Vivekananda when he came to the United States. In the early 1900s, she went to India and lived there for several years. She met Sarada Devi and many of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. In later years, she was associated with the Vedanta movement in America. She wrote several books, notably Sri Ramakrishna and Days in an Indian Monastery. I don't think I've read her book on Sri Ramakrishna, but I have read Days in an Indian Monastery, and it's really insightful and wonderful how her impressions and experiences. It says she was associated with the Vedanta movement in the United States. She was with Swami Parmananda in La Crescenta. Swami Parmananda had a center in Los Angeles in the 1920s, and Swami Prabhavananda was asked to come down and start a center. And Bellarmont had said, I think Los Angeles is a big enough city for two centers. Later, Swami Parmananda's group broke away, but they're still very close. They're still Ramakrishna Vedanta, and they have one in, where is it, in Massachusetts? Cohasset, Massachusetts, and La Crescenta. They're very, very devoted. Okay, so we will start. Christ said, "He who is the greatest among you, let him be your servant." By this measure of values, Latu Maharaj was among the greatest of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, for he was a living embodiment of the spirit of service. He was always the servant. He began life as the servant of man. Contact with Sri Ramakrishna made him the servant of God. And after the Master's passing, he became the servant of the servants of the Lord. Even his plain, thick-set body seemed built for carrying loads and lifting burdens. He never tried to cast aside his humble duties or change his dharma. When in later years he began to expound the Bhagavad Gita and talk informally to the young men who daily gathered around him for spiritual instruction, I feel sure he did it less as a teacher than as a servant of men. Some of his more scholarly brothers smiled lovingly and indulgently at this sudden departure from his usual habit of life. But one of them said to me later, after listening to him unperceived, he smiled no more, for he was deeply impressed by Latu's wisdom and his simple manner of setting it forth. In reality, Latu was teaching from the time he joined Sri Ramakrishna. For more than one of the immediate disciples told me they had learned to serve by seeing him care for the Master. It was as a servant, not as a disciple, that he came to Sri Ramakrishna. He was employed in the family of a rich householder who was a devout follower of Sri Ramakrishna. The gentleman was in the habit of sending frequent gifts to Sri Ramakrishna, and Latu was the one chosen to carry them. Sri Ramakrishna saw, through the boy's rough exterior, the glowing fervor of his soul. He noticed also with what devotion he brought his master's offerings, and how reluctant he was to turn homeward again. So one day he said to the gentleman, "You're always asking to do something for me. Why do you not give this boy Latu to serve me?" The gentleman went home delighted and sent the boy as he might have sent a chutter or a fine spun dhoti, means wearing cloth. Latu took up his new service with overflowing heart. The joy of it lifted his thought until, all unaware, he passed from consciousness to superconsciousness and attained samadhi. It was scarcely a month after his coming to the temple that this happened. Master and disciple were on terms of the greatest familiarity. Sometimes Latu would scold his master as he might scold a little child because he'd not taken sufficient food, or he would squat beside him like an anxious mother and coax him to eat a little more and still a little more. He guarded him when he was in samadhi and watched over him when he slept. He was disciple, mother, guardian, and watcher, but above all, he chose to be the servant. After he took sannyas and became known as Swami Adbhutananda, even then, he held fast to his desire to count as the least among the disciples. My first meeting with Latu Maharaj was at Calcutta in Balaram Babu's house. I had gone to see Swami Premananda, who had come from Bellarmine, and was stopping there temporarily. Swami Premananda told me Latu had been asking for me. I rose and walked down the long front room where we were sitting, meaning to send word to him that I was in the house. At the door, I met a strange Swami. I felt intuitively that it was Latu Maharaj and bent forward to touch his feet. He raised his hand in protest and stepped back. Then he stooped to touch my feet. I raised my hand and stepped back. A stranger might have taken it for a mystic dance. After several unsuccessful attempts, we gave it up and never tried again. It was wholly unfitting that he should touch my feet, and his habit of always taking the lowlier place made him unwilling that I should touch his. My first words to him were, "I am so happy to meet you, Swamiji, because I know that Sri Ramakrishna had a special love for you." "My master loved all equally," was his brusque reply. I was a little discouraged. I seemed to be making so many blunders. He must have noticed my discomfort, for suddenly he grew most cordial and affectionate in his manner toward me. From that moment, we were warm friends. He had not lost the habit of carrying gifts, and every few days he would stop at the girls' school in Bospora Lane and leave an orange or a green coconut or some little gift for me. Once, I remember, he brought me a miniature Bengali Gita. He knew I could not read it, but he thought I would like to have it as a curiosity. On these visits, I never saw him. I only slept and ate at the school. The day was spent with Holy Mother in the upper rooms of the Udbodhan office in Mukherjee Lane. But whenever I went to Balaram Babu's house, we spent a short time together. He was living there. We never had a long conversation. He would express pleasure at some little thing I had brought him, ask me how I was doing. I would ask him how he was doing. Then he would speak for a moment of Sri Ramakrishna or Holy Mother, and the visit would be over. In English, at least, Latu Maharaj was a person of few words. He was also a person of few needs. His room bore witness to it. It lay immediately to the right of the household entrance. The door was nearly always open, and as one passed, one could see the large, empty space with a small, thin mat on the floor. At the far end, a low table for a bed. On one side, a few half-dead embers in an open hearth, and on them, a pot of tea. I suspect that the pot of tea represented the whole of Latu Maharaj's concession to the body. I think you remember earlier, that was the one boon he asked, "May I have my tea every day?" And he did. Those who battle for the high places can learn a salient lesson from this humble disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who brought honor to the lowliest place. He found a light in servitude, and to him came the vision. To him came the close daily association with the mighty master. He shone with the glory of his humble task, and he glorified it. St. Francis of Assisi spoke often of himself and his friars as servants of God, and he charged his followers again and again to go about their labor in all humility and gaiety of mind. What are the servants to the Lord, he said, but his minstrels, who should lift up the hearts of men and move them to joy of spirit? Latu Maharaj may not have had a voice of minstrelsy, but I've never heard that word. But his whole life was a glad song of service, and when he met death, it was with a smile on his face and a song in his soul. The song of humble labor is now muted, but I believe it sounds on in vaster worlds, and he is still minstrel and servant of God. This reminiscent reminds one of Brother Lawrence, who also served happily with whatever he did as a servant. Now we have Kumud Bandhu Sen. Kumud Bandhu Sen was a householder devotee who met Swami Vivekananda and had much association with many of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. I first met Latu Maharaj in 1894 at the Ulambazar Monastery, but I first heard about him from Shashi Maharaj when I visited the Bharanagore Monastery as a boy. Shashi Maharaj told me, the intimate disciples of Sri Ramakrishna are like a bouquet of many different flowers. Each is the embodiment of a certain bhava, spiritual concept, but all are strung on the thread of Sri Ramakrishna's love. Look at Latu Maharaj. Ramchandra Datta engaged this boy from Bihar as a servant. With fruit, sweets, and other he would send him now and then to Sri Ramakrishna with fruit, sweets, and other offerings. At a glance, Sri Ramakrishna knew that this boy belonged to his inner circle. After a few visits, he came to stay with Sri Ramakrishna on a permanent basis. The way he served was something remarkable. Although his primary responsibility was to serve Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, at the same time, Latu had tremendous steadfastness in spiritual practices. Sri Ramakrishna had some knowledge of reading and writing, but Latu was completely unlettered. After hearing this, I developed a strong desire to talk with Latu Maharaj. When I visited the monastery, I would see him meditating, and at other times I would notice his brother disciples making all sorts of jokes at his expense, for his simple nature brought out their sense of humor. One day, therefore, I went to the monastery at Ulambazar with the purpose of talking with Latu Maharaj. After making salutations, I stood before him. He asked me to sit down and then inquired, "Where do you live? Who is in your family? How did you come here?" Then he said, "Read attentively. Just see how learned my brother disciples are, how they are always engaged in study and meditation. Narendra, what a miracle he has performed in America. People of that country are amazed at his learning. One must concentrate on God. If you cannot concentrate sufficiently on your studies, how can you expect to be able to call on God? Come here occasionally. Chant the name of the Lord every morning. First bathe and put on a clean cloth, and then sit in the corner of a room or in a solitary place and think of God. Then you will find happiness in your life." He spoke in Bengali with a Hindi accent. On another occasion at Ulambazar, I was listening to Swami Chetanananda and Yogananda talking about Sri Ramakrishna. Latu Maharaj was sitting on the front part of the southern veranda. Just then a kirtan party came, wending its way down the street. And as Latu Maharaj heard their devotional singing, he went into an ecstatic mood. Swami Chetanananda noticed his condition at once and cried out, Latu is in ecstasy. See that he doesn't fall." The Swamis went over to Latu Maharaj and began to chant the name of the Lord. They chanted for some time. At last, Latu Maharaj regained consciousness of the outer world. He said simply, "Nothing happened." Then he hurried off in the direction of Sri Ramakrishna's shrine. This was the first time I had ever seen anyone in samadhi. The Swamis resumed their conversation and made no mention of the incident. I understood later that such experiences were common among the direct disciples, and that they did not consider it a matter requiring any particular comment. At the Alambazar Monastery and later in Nilambar Babu's garden house and at Bellarmont, I noticed that both Swamiji and Swami Brahma-jnani would poke fun at Latu Maharaj, and he would believe them like a simple boy. For example, he would always slip away as soon as any of Swamiji's Western disciples came in sight. One day, Swamiji said to him in jest, "Brother Latu, this time you will have to go to America. Many people want to meet you, for they know you were a favorite disciple of Sri Ramakrishna." With some embarrassment, Latu Maharaj said, "Brother Narayan, I shall not go. Their manners and customs are different. I would not be able to adjust." "What?" said Swamiji. "They are devotees of Sri Ramakrishna, and by his name the whole country has become holy. They will love and respect you." With folded hands, Latu Maharaj replied, No, you must excuse me, brother. I cannot go. I am an illiterate person. What do I know? I cannot talk to them. I don't know their language." The conversation continued in this vein for some time. Finally, Swami Brahmananda broke in. "Nevertheless, they will catch you and force you to go to America." At this, Latu Maharaj's face paled and everyone laughed. But he did not understand that these remarks were made only in jest. And without telling anyone, he left the monastery and fled to Balaram Bose's house in Calcutta. I witnessed many such events. To help take away his fear of Westerners, Swamiji took Latu Maharaj with him on his tour to Kashmir. One day at Balaram's house, I asked Latu Maharaj to give me his impression of Sri Ramakrishna. He said rather gravely, "Did you see Swami Vivekananda? What did you notice about him?" "He was a man of bliss," I replied. "Since he had this bliss, those who saw him and heard him would also get a taste of it." Then Latu Maharaj's face beamed, and he said, "Swamiji was a man of bliss, that is true. Now think of Sri Ramakrishna, who was 100 times more blissful. There is nothing to be compared with that bliss." After saying this, he once again became serious, and I watched him. He became even more serious and indrawn. Seeing this unlettered disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, I used to think, how negligible and how narrow is scriptural knowledge compared to his knowledge, which has come through realization and direct perception. He expresses the most abstruse philosophical matters in such simple language. How wonderfully is Sri Ramakrishna's miraculous power revealed in the life of Swami Adbhutananda. One day, Swami Abhutananda told me how hard he had worked in the West. One day, Swami Abhutananda told me how hard he had worked in the West to preach the ideals of Sri Ramakrishna, and how, after Swamiji's passing, his lecturing earned much praise from many Western savants. I said to him, "Maharaj, you and Swamiji are accomplished speakers and knowers of Brahman. It is no wonder that through the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, these things have come to you. But Latu Maharaj was unlettered. His wonderful life and his knowledge are brilliant examples of Sri Ramakrishna's miraculous powers. Swami Abhutananda was moved by these words and said gently, "Yes, you are right. We brother disciples consider Latu Maharaj to be Sri Ramakrishna's miracle. A great soul such as he is very rare." When I visited Latu Maharaj while he was staying at Balaram's house, I was amazed to see what love he expressed for the devotees. Both young and old would come there, all devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. Once a young man approached the Swami and told him that he planned to give up his job and pass the rest of his days practicing spiritual disciplines and making pilgrimages to various temples and shrines. Latu Maharaj responded sternly, "So you would like to be a vagabond and avoid the duties expected of you by your parents? No. Your duty now is to serve your parents, and especially your old grandmother, who has cared for you from your childhood. Who will provide for them if you give up your job? I know what kind of devotion you have to God. How long do you meditate? I sometimes see you loafing about here and there. Those who pretend to be tyagis, renunciates, by not taking care of their parents will never be able to call on God with one-pointed devotion. They pass their days in restlessness." Sri Ramakrishna used to say, "Parents are the living gods. One should serve them and take care of their needs. One should ask for their blessing. First make arrangements for their necessities. Then you can retire in solitude to practice spiritual disciplines. Only then will you be able to call upon God without interruption. Give up this wrong attitude. When genuine renunciation comes to you, God will arrange everything. Don't force anything or act impulsively." Then he looked at me and said, "Just see, he is going to become a monk without arranging for support for his aging parents. There is no greater sin in this world. Ask him to perform spiritual practices, and in 5 minutes he's finished. Just note how much renunciation he has. But if anyone calls on God with heart and soul, he arranges everything." Thus would Latu Maharaj use both sound advice and scoldings to correct a devotee's understanding. I went to Varanasi on several occasions to see Latu Maharaj. I can never forget his love and compassion. He was an exemplary teacher, always helping his devotees to build their lives through spiritual disciplines. He used to answer their questions in a simple and direct manner. At the very sight of him, we were aware of the presence of a great soul filled with divine bliss, simple and childlike. Once at Varanasi, he said to me, Sri Ramakrishna used to say Kashi, another name for Varanasi, is a golden city. Lord Vishwanath, the great God, is liberating individual souls by giving them the supreme mantra. Vishwanath's compassion is infinite. Annapurna, the Divine Mother, is supplying food to all, spiritual as well as physical. God incarnates as an avatar, as a man, and thereby blesses the world. Keep this in mind while you are here in this holy place, Varanasi. I still remember him on this occasion, seated quietly, completely merged in thought. When I was about to leave, I prostrated before him, and he said affectionately, "You are staying at the Advaita ashram. Come now and then to visit me." I think often of his infinite compassion and his joyful face. And his divine form lingers in my memory for a long time. Now we have, I think, only 2 more reminiscences, which we will do next Wednesday. We have Swami Chetanananda, who wrote 2 books on Latu in Bengali, and we have, who's the last one? Swami Vasudevananda. And then we will start, as I say, on Memories of a Loving Soul, Swami Premananda. Were there any questions or any comments on Latu? He's very different from, we've read about Swami Shivananda and we've read about Maharaj and Holy Mother, and he's very different in one way, in the externals, but very, very much the same with the inner growth. Any comments by anyone? Okay. This Saturday we will have gospel reading at 5 o'clock here in the temple. And on Sunday, Swami Vivekananda will give a talk on yoga and psychotherapy. I want you all to remember that at the end of the month, on the 24th, we're having a retreat on the prophet given by Swami Yogatmananda. It'll be here in person, it'll be on Zoom and YouTube also. If any of you haven't read the Prophet by Khalil Gibran since the 60s, I just reread it myself. And it's beautiful, but I never would have thought. And he will also be giving the talk Sunday morning on the 25th on the open secret. But keep that in mind. Don't get too busy on the weekend of the 24th and 25th. Oh, Karma Yoga Day. We have more. Karma Yoga Day will be on the 17th from 9 to noon. Same thing, come if you'd like to volunteer work. We have different kinds of work. A lot of it's in the garden still. But we have other things. And then you'll have lunch with us. Go meditate and have lunch with us, okay? No comments? No. All right. It starts at 9 o'clock on Saturday the 17th. And you come down to the kitchen, because that's where we kind of gather. Usually people have a cup of tea before they get started, and we get them organized in the various areas. Okay? All right, then we'll end with a slight chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. We'll see you